The world watches Israel once again, standing in the eye of a spiritual storm. Every decision, every speech, every movement in Jerusalem seems to echo something ancient, as if history itself were walking back into the pages of Ezekiel. The bones that once lay scattered in the prophet's vision have come together, and the question that once sounded distant now beats loudly in our time. Has prophecy come alive again? For centuries, the words of Ezekiel were seen as distant poetry, a promise too grand for reality. But since the rebirth of Israel, and especially under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, the tone of those ancient lines feels sharper, clearer, almost urgent. He may not see himself as part of prophecy, yet his actions seem to trace the exact lines once written by the prophet who saw beyond the ruins. When nations gather, when alliances shift, when Jerusalem becomes the center of world debate, Ezekiel's shadow grows longer. And in that shadow, a truth stirs, that perhaps we are no longer reading prophecy, but living inside it. Subscribe to the channel, because those who stop watching may miss the very moment when the words of Ezekiel become reality before their eyes. Ezekiel stood before a valley filled with bones, dry, scattered, forgotten. Yet in that silence he heard a command that would shake time itself. Prophesy to these bones. It wasn't only about death coming to life, but about a nation that would one day rise from the dust of exile. When the bones joined, flesh covered them, and breath returned. Ezekiel saw more than a miracle. He saw Israel, lifeless for centuries, breathing again. For generations, those words sounded like an impossible dream. Empires rose and fell, rulers changed, but the people of Israel remained scattered. Then in 1948, the impossible happened. A nation long considered gone was reborn in a single day. The bones of prophecy rattled, and the world witnessed one of the most dramatic fulfillments of Scripture in modern history. But prophecy doesn't stop at rebirth. It moves toward awakening. Ezekiel described the nation rising before the Spirit entered it, as if political restoration had to come before spiritual renewal. That order matters. The state came first, the heart will come later. It's a divine sequence, one that shapes how history unfolds before the eyes of a world that still doubts. Benjamin Netanyahu emerged in that same landscape, a man of politics, not prophecy, yet one whose leadership became a symbol of the nation's endurance. His rise wasn't just about power, it mirrored a biblical rhythm, the pulse of a people rebuilding their strength while still searching for their soul. Like the sinews in Ezekiel's vision, his years in power seemed to hold together what might otherwise fall apart. Under Netanyahu, Israel became more confident, more assertive, and more aware of its ancient calling. And though his policies often stirred global tension, there's something undeniable about the timing. It's as if every controversy, every decision, every headline adds another layer to that same prophetic valley, where the bones of the past still echo the breath of God. Many believe the prophecy of Ezekiel 37 isn't just about physical return, but about identity, about a nation rediscovering its covenant after wandering through history's deserts. If that's true, then what we see now is only the beginning. The valley is still trembling. The breath hasn't finished its work. Perhaps now is the moment to look around and ask, do you see the same signs unfolding? Write in the comments what you believe these events reveal, whether Israel's rise is mere politics or the living pulse of prophecy itself. Ezekiel's vision did not end with the bones rising. It moved toward something sacred, the return of glory to the house of God. Chapters 40 through 48 describe a new temple, a restored order, and the presence of the Lord returning to Jerusalem. For centuries, that vision stood as a distant promise. Yet in the modern state of Israel, movements began to stir that few would have dared to imagine. And in the center of these ripples stands a familiar figure, Benjamin Netanyahu. During his leadership, the ancient longing for the temple found new expression. Organizations dedicated to its reconstruction gained unprecedented visibility. Pilgrims, priests, and scholars spoke openly again about sacrifices, priestly garments, and the sacred mount that Ezekiel foresaw. While many dismiss these efforts as symbolic, others see them as the first trembling of something greater, a preparation long foretold. Netanyahu, though a secular man by appearance, carried the weight of Israel's destiny in nearly every political step. His unwavering defense of Jerusalem's sovereignty over the Temple Mount marked a shift in tone and courage. He spoke not merely as a politician, but as someone protecting the memory of Solomon's altar. Whether or not he intended it, his actions echoed the words of the prophet. "And the glory of the Lord entered the house by the way of the gate." These gestures, while political on the surface, stirred a spiritual current. Every speech about Jerusalem's unity, every defense of the nation's right to its land, seemed to breathe new life into the collective memory of Israel. It was as though Netanyahu, knowingly or not, was tracing Ezekiel's blueprint, restoring what had been scattered, reclaiming what had been desecrated. In Ezekiel's writings, restoration is never just construction, it's revelation. Stones and altars are symbols of something deeper, a heart turning back to the covenant. The more Israel asserts its presence on the mount, the closer the echo of prophecy becomes. The city begins to tremble again, not from war, but from awakening. Some say Netanyahu's tenure was nothing more than politics wrapped in faith. Others see in it the unfolding of a divine plan, where even ambition serves a higher script. The paradox is powerful, a leader defending physical land while unknowingly preparing spiritual ground. That tension is what gives the story its prophetic pulse. If you believe these moves carry meaning beyond politics, if they whisper of Ezekiel's vision reborn, then take a moment to like this video. Every gesture of awareness helps keep this conversation alive in a world that so easily forgets what's unfolding right before its eyes. Ezekiel's words shift from the valley to the battlefield, from bones to nations. In chapters 38 and 39, the prophet describes a storm of armies rising from the north, led by a mysterious figure named Gog, ruler of the land of Magog. He speaks of a coalition that gathers against Israel in the last days, a moment when the world's balance tilts toward confrontation. To many, this sounds distant, almost mythic. Yet history seems to move closer to those verses with every headline that flashes across our screens. Ancient names like Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal have long been linked to modern powers, nations with vast armies and global influence. Persia, which Ezekiel also names, corresponds to modern Iran. When alliances form between these regions, prophecy begins to breathe again. What once looked like a poetic image of chaos now mirrors political maps drawn in real time. The stage described by Ezekiel seems almost prepared. During Netanyahu's years in power, Israel found itself surrounded not only by enemies, but by shifting allegiances that fit eerily into the prophet's outline. His diplomacy brought alliances with the West, yet constant hostility from the East. Each summit, each conflict, each sudden military alert seemed to echo the words, "I will put hooks in your jaws and bring you forth." It was as if invisible hands guided the pieces of a chessboard no one fully understood. Ezekiel's prophecy insists on one central truth. The battle of Gog and Magog is not about human ambition, but about divine revelation. It is through this chaos that the nations shall know that I am the Lord. Netanyahu's role, whether intentional or not, fits this pattern. A man of defense and calculation standing in the middle of a storm he cannot control, yet essential for the script to move forward. There is something haunting about watching ancient prophecy overlap with breaking news. When Israel faces isolation, when threats rise from the north, when armies mass on its borders, those old words resurface. In the latter days, you shall come against my people. What was once symbol now feels like warning, and that warning isn't meant to inspire fear, but awareness that history itself may be fulfilling divine rhythm. In moments like these, it becomes harder to separate politics from prophecy. The names change, the weapons evolve, but the pattern remains. It's the same pulse Ezekiel felt when he saw the nations move, the same divine intention that bends history toward revelation. The prophecy of Gog and Magog isn't a prediction of doom, it's the unveiling of sovereignty. And if all this is unfolding before our very eyes, then now is the time to stay awake. Subscribe to the channel because these events are accelerating, and those who watch with discernment will recognize what others call coincidence as the echo of prophecy returning to life. If Ezekiel taught anything through his visions, it's that divine will often hides beneath human decisions. The prophet made it clear even rulers who ignore God can still fulfill his purpose. "And the nations shall know that I am the Lord," Ezekiel 38:23 declares. Not after peace, but through turmoil. This is the paradox of prophecy. Men act by ambition, yet heaven directs the outcome. Israel's modern history proves this again and again. Benjamin Netanyahu may speak the language of politics, but his path unfolds like a script already written. Every alliance, every speech at the United Nations, every defensive strike seems to fall in place within something larger than his own design. Critics call it strategy. Believers see providence. Either way, Israel moves along a course mapped long before its leaders were born. Ezekiel's God does not need willing servants to accomplish his plans, only instruments. Pharaoh resisted, Babylon conquered, Cyrus restored. Through each, the divine pattern advanced. Netanyahu, with all his human flaws, stands in that same paradox. His defiance, his confidence, his relentless pursuit of national security may appear purely political, yet through them the pulse of prophecy continues. The hand of God in Israel's politics is subtle but unrelenting. It manifests in survival against overwhelming odds, in victories no strategist can fully explain, in the persistence of a nation that refuses to disappear. Ezekiel saw that same resilience when he prophesied to bones that could not breathe, and watched them stand as an army again. Sometimes divine movement looks like chaos. Governments rise and fall, coalitions form and fracture, yet somehow Israel endures, exactly as foretold. It's a nation built not just on defense but on destiny. Every crisis becomes another chapter in a story that keeps circling back to the same conclusion. Nothing happens outside the reach of the unseen hand. When Netanyahu acts, willingly or not, he becomes part of that machinery. His leadership has drawn both admiration and outrage, yet neither changes the fact that Israel's story was never meant to be ordinary. It was meant to reveal, through tension, through conflict, through survival, that divine control never loosened its grip. What do you see when you look at Israel's leaders, politics or prophecy? Share your thoughts below about how far you believe divine purpose reaches into the world of power and decision. Throughout history, Israel has faced enemies greater in number, wealth, and weaponry. Yet time after time, the outcome defies logic. Ezekiel spoke of this very mystery, that when the nations surround Jerusalem, the Lord himself will rise to defend it. "I will fight against you with pestilence and blood," the prophet wrote, describing divine intervention not as metaphor, but as reality. The wars of modern Israel seem to echo that ancient vow. From 1948 to the present, Israel's survival often borders on the miraculous. During the Six-Day War, outnumbered soldiers captured territories in less than a week. In the Yom Kippur War, when defeat seemed certain, the tide turned at the last moment. Analysts speak of intelligence, timing, or luck, but Ezekiel would have called it something else: the breath of God defending his covenant people. Under Netanyahu's leadership, this pattern persisted. Surrounded by nations sworn to its destruction, Israel endured rocket fire, cyber attacks, diplomatic isolation, yet stood unbroken. Each close call, each narrow escape, reads like a modern commentary on Ezekiel's vision. "And you shall dwell safely in your land." Not because the enemies weakened, but because the promise never did. The supernatural protection described by Ezekiel isn't a shield of gold. It's the invisible orchestration of outcomes that no one can predict. When missiles fail to detonate, when ceasefires arrive at the edge of disaster, when global pressure collapses just before catastrophe, it feels as if unseen hands are rearranging the chaos to preserve one purpose: that Israel remains. Even skeptics admit there's something uncanny about this nation's endurance. It's not just about strategy, it's about survival that transcends probability. Ezekiel saw it coming. "I will set my glory among the nations, and all shall see my judgment." Each conflict becomes a stage where divine justice writes itself in the smoke and silence that follow the battle. Netanyahu's confidence in Israel's defense often sounded political, but deep down it carried a trace of faith that somehow, against all odds, the covenant holds. Perhaps he never intended to play a prophetic role, yet his tenure keeps aligning with the rhythm of a God who intervenes through impossibility. That rhythm has not slowed, Have you ever looked at these wars and wondered if strategy alone could explain them? Leave a comment with what you've seen or felt about Israel's protection, whether it's politics, providence, or something only prophecy can explain. Ezekiel 36 spoke of something even deeper than restoration, the transformation of the heart. "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you," the Lord declared. The prophet saw that before Israel's complete redemption, there would be turmoil, crises that would strip away pride and expose the nation's need for renewal. It was never just about land or politics, it was about awakening. And in our time, that awakening seems to unfold not in peace, but in conflict. Modern Israel lives in a paradox, a thriving economy, a strong military yet an aching division within. Political unrest, protests, and cultural fractures have filled its streets. Under Netanyahu, that divide became even more visible. One side clinging to tradition, another chasing modern ideals. Yet Ezekiel's prophecy foresaw this tension, because awakening rarely begins in harmony. It begins in discomfort, in the tearing down of illusions that once felt secure. Spiritual rebirth often hides beneath national struggle. The arguments over faith, identity, and destiny inside Israel aren't signs of failure. They're labor pains of transformation. Just as the dry bones needed to be shattered before they could live again, the heart of a nation must be broken before it can be renewed. What looks like political chaos may, in truth, be divine surgery. Ezekiel's message echoes through every Israeli street: cleansing before glory, humility before presence. When corruption is exposed, when divisions rise to the surface, it's not the end of the story. It's the shaking that prepares the spirit to receive new breath. The crisis becomes the teacher, forcing a return to the covenant forgotten amid progress and pride. Netanyahu's government often stood at the intersection of these spiritual tremors. His tenure saw both revival movements and deep moral questioning within society. The leader who defended Israel on the world stage also presided over a nation wrestling with its own soul. That contrast, strength outside, fracture within, mirrors the path Ezekiel described for Israel's final purification. And while the world sees instability, prophecy sees process. Each scandal, protest, or reform may simply be another spark in the refining fire. The prophet never promised comfort. He promised transformation. And transformation always costs something: pride, control, certainty. Israel's struggle isn't a sign of weakness. It's evidence that the spirit is stirring again. Look around. The same unrest-shaking nations might be awakening something deeper than politics. What signs do you see in your world that point to this spiritual renewal? Share in the comments what you believe these crises are meant to reveal. Ezekiel's visions never focused solely on Israel. They also exposed the hearts of the nations surrounding it. In chapters 35 and 36, the prophet describes how Edom and other neighbors mocked the land's desolation, rejoicing over Israel's suffering. "Because you have said, 'Aha,' against my sanctuary," says the Lord, "therefore I will stretch out my hand against you." The message was clear. The nations that scorn God's purpose would themselves become instruments of His revelation. Modern headlines echo those ancient words. Nations around Israel still speak with contempt, through sanctions, boycotts, and resolutions that challenge its right to exist. Their voices have changed languages, but not tone. The prophet's warning lives on in every diplomatic clash, every vote against Jerusalem's sovereignty. It is prophecy, replayed in real time, as if history itself were bound to repeat the pattern until the lesson is complete. Netanyahu's leadership intensified this tension. His insistence on Israel's autonomy, especially concerning Jerusalem and defense, polarized global opinion. Some hailed him as a defender of divine promise. Others branded him as a symbol of division. But even this polarity fulfills Ezekiel's image. The nations gathering not in unity, but in judgment. A mirror through which the world exposes its stance toward the sacred. Ezekiel prophesied that these nations would mock, yet ultimately recognize the Lord's hand upon Israel. "And the heathen shall know that I am the Lord, when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes." That sanctification rarely comes through peace. It comes when the world watches Israel endure what should destroy it, and survive. That endurance becomes the testimony, the living sermon written not with ink, but with history itself. The hostility of nations, then, is not the end, but the evidence, the proof that prophecy continues. Every headline condemning Israel, every diplomatic isolation, every wave of public criticism adds another brushstroke to Ezekiel's canvas. The more the world pressures Jerusalem, the clearer its prophetic role becomes. The Lord uses opposition to highlight his promise. Netanyahu's global conflicts, from Iran's threats to the debates at the United Nations, reveal that same paradox. Even when the world turns against Jerusalem, its survival deepens the prophetic tension. Each act of defiance, each stand for sovereignty, becomes part of a larger spiritual chessboard, one the nations don't even realize they're playing on. Look around the world today. Alliances shift, power structures tremble, and Israel remains at the center. Do you think these patterns are coincidence or the unfolding of something written long ago? Share in the comments what you believe the nation's reactions reveal about where we are in Ezekiel's timeline. Ezekiel ends his book not with destruction, but with restoration, a vision so radiant that even exile fades before it. After the wars, the shaking, the judgment, he sees the glory of the Lord returning by the eastern gate, and the name of the city from that day shall be, "The Lord is there." Those words close the prophecy, but they also open the final chapter of history. They promise that divine presence, once departed, will return, not as a symbol but as reality. Modern Israel still walks in the shadow of that promise. The nation stands reborn yet restless, surrounded yet sustained. And in the midst of it all, leaders like Netanyahu continue to navigate between faith and politics, prophecy and power. Whether he knows it or not, his time marks a season when the stage is being set, when the silence between God and his people begins to break. Ezekiel's final vision is not about temples of stone, but about the return of presence. The prophet describes waters flowing from the sanctuary, healing everything they touch. Even the Dead Sea becomes alive again. It is a picture not just of Israel's renewal, but of a world restored through it. That is where all prophecy points, to a moment when divine glory no longer visits, but dwells. If the first half of Ezekiel's prophecy spoke of bones and rebirth, this final image speaks of indwelling, of God's Spirit finding a home again among his people. The wars, the politics, the crises are only the scaffolding of that greater truth. Every conflict has meaning. Every restoration is rehearsal. The story has always been moving toward this, the return of glory. Netanyahu, like the kings and prophets before him, may fade from the scene, but the purpose remains. His name, his decisions, his controversies, all of them serve a single unfolding design. In every generation, a vessel rises to fulfill part of the promise. The leader is never the focus, the presence is. The real protagonist of Israel's story has always been the same, the Lord who returns. And when that glory comes, it won't announce itself through thunder or politics. It will arrive quietly yet unmistakably in the renewal of hearts and the recognition that history itself has been divine choreography all along. Ezekiel's city will no longer be known for conflict, but for the indwelling of peace. So if you've followed this far, don't lose sight now. Subscribe to the channel, not just to hear about prophecy, but to stay awake as it unfolds. Because one day soon the words written on ancient scrolls will no longer be read, they will be seen.